Hey everybody, how's my front row? Are you guys ready for questions? Good to be with all of you. Mayor, thanks so much for joining us today. Again, we were just talking backstage about your friendship with Ed Lee, the mayor here in town, and his passing today. And you made this very interesting comment that I'd love you to share with others. Tell us what Ed Lee was like when the camera wasn't on him.
You know, in this kind of rough and tumble world of politics, Ed Lee was just a beacon of decency. And a lot of politicians are great in front of the camera to make people believe that they care about vulnerable populations or disenfranchised populations, or they care about lifting women up. I wouldn't say that Ed was so great at that as much as he was behind the camera. Like, truly, as a human being, he was so passionate about doing the right thing, about supporting women in power. I can speak from direct experience, and really just had a huge compassion for immigrant communities, disempowered communities. And he just was a really beautiful human being, and he was a dear friend and mentor to me, and I will miss him very much.
Well, I'm glad you shared that, because I happen to know Ed Lee as well, and I had the same feeling of behind the camera. You know, he had this ridiculously steely resolve on, like, I mean, he was mayor inclusion. He was the inclusion mayor, you know, and so just again, I mentioned a little while ago, and I'm glad you shared that about what you said in the back, and I'm going to quote the mayor. She called some people that are on the camera doing these complete cowards and derelicts in their responsibility, but not Ed Lee. So with that, thanks for letting me put words in your mouth. Mayor, let me talk about your job. You know, I was reading about Oakland and your leadership there, what you're trying to do, and all the fun you're having there with labor unions and everything. And, you know, it just reminded me of that great thing, you know, the adage, you know, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Does your job suck, or is it great?
Both.
Yeah?
You know, where I get my energy is spending time with young people. And it's so difficult when, you know, a 10-year-old asks you, what's it like to be the mayor of Oakland? And I'm like, well, do you have 10 years? But I always say it's the highest highs and the lowest lows. And sometimes those can happen in the same 5 minutes.
Does it help you or hurt you that Jerry Brown was a mayor of Oakland?
Am I allowed to answer all your questions with both? On one hand, it helped. So if there's one thing I want you to know about me, I am born and raised in the city of Oakland.
Right.
Like, I bleed oak trees. And so as an Oakland native, as somebody who has watched my city, I'm 52 years old, and I am proud of it. As someone who has watched my city kind of get passed by moments of revitalization or investment, I was so determined to not let Oakland get passed by again. At the same time, I am not willing to sell the beautiful soul of my city for any type of success. And so Jerry, one, he enabled the kind of revitalization that we're seeing today.
Right.
His 10K laid the foundation for what is now a revitalized downtown, a real, like, urban vitality. But he did cast a lot of doubt about the willingness of government to not be true to the soul of the city, the legacy of Oakland as a place that stood for social justice, that was in its heart a blue-collar town, that had an authentic kind of grittiness that many would argue San Francisco certainly may or may not have ever had, but certainly does not have anymore. So that, I think that's both the plus and the minus of the Jerry Brown legacy, just to be honest.
I sometimes wonder if when we look at a mayor, and clearly you are the chief executive of the city, but there are lots of things you don't control. As I was reading about Uber, about Uber committing to go in and putting a lot of jobs pulling out, and it just made me wonder today when we're talking about, you know, these complicated topics of how do you get the ecosystem right that is good on inclusion, that brings all the stakeholders into society together in an empowered way. It doesn't leave people behind, doesn't leave talent on the table. And as a mayor, I guess if you had a choice between, say, Salesforce and what I hear and suspect sounds like a decent operation, and Uber, which under its previous thing was a kind of diversity and inclusion disaster, and do you feel like you have the power to say no to door A and yes to door B?
No, just I'll let you in on this secret. I don't control private property.
Right.
And that is frustrating because I get blamed all the time that Uber moved to Oakland, and I'm like, wait, I didn't. That's not how it works. I can't tell a private property owner, you may not sell your private property to this purchaser who's going to pay you the most money for it. Now, what I can do, and what I did do, is, of course, I was asked to give them a tax break, and I said no. And I did take the opportunity to send a well-publicized letter to the company to say, welcome to Oakland, and here's what I expect out of you. And to talk about how you can show up in our city in a way that I think resonates with our values, and to set a tone of expectation for a major corporate citizen. So that's kind of, a mayor, your actual authority, again, don't tell anybody, is actually pretty small. What you do with the leadership that you have potentially at your disposal is much bigger.
Mayor, one of the other things that's happened today, again, I raised it earlier, was that the president tweeted out a pretty striking tweet, basically
the president
demeaning
tweeted?
Kirsten Gillibrand.
That's such a shock.
And you're a powerful woman in the United States, one of the most powerful mayors in the United States, and I'm just interested, if I can be this bold and ask you, what is your experience as you have risen through the ranks, in this age of Me Too, in this age of just horrific behavior in some quarters, and I'm just interested, what has your experience been in this? Have you had anything you can share with us that would be useful to the people in this audience about their lives and how to, I guess, prevail amidst tough circumstances that they've had?
So, I just got invited to write an essay for the East Bay Express Us Too edition. You'll see my picture on the cover. Pick up a copy. There's some really good essays in it. And I was interviewed by Gassia Michaelia on Channel 2, and she said, Mayor, what struck me about your essay was it wasn't just one horrific kind of sexual assault. You talked about 100 different ways that you have been sexually harassed throughout your career. And I think that it's so important, and this is not just about women and sexual harassment, this is also about people of color and racial harassment, that sometimes it is that kind of death by 100 cuts, that it's this accumulation of 1,000 insults, discriminations, that are not so bad that you have to file a police report, but they really build up to a level of toxicity within your system. And so, I always like to say, I have nothing against white men. I'm married to one. But unless you are from another identity or another life experience that is not the dominant identity or life experience, you just don't know what those very subtle and pervasive insults, harassments, discriminations are, so you're not going to be in as good of a position to reverse engineer them. And that is why diversity and inclusion are so important. Thank you.
So you've just gone, I genuinely believe that you have a sense of how tough the death by 1,000 cuts is, or the situation by 1,000 cuts. And you've just gone through, as I understand it, what is now a suspended strike, 3,000 workers. And you had, I was going to read it, you wrote a fascinating open letter to the city of Oakland, to the residents of Oakland, as saying, we have this challenge, essentially, how do we do right by those who work to keep the city running and do these things and deal with labor rate at the same time of not being able to do this? I don't know how you're squaring that circle, but how is you a mayor in a resource-strapped city that many people see is real estate skyrocketing, very tight corporate real estate markets, technology companies moving in. I know that yesterday you were walking through City Hall and I heard a little birdie tell me, Mayor, what did you do with all the tech money?
I'm like, I don't know. Where is it?
And so how, when you're looking at this and you're looking at those people in the labor union that are struggling for a better situation and probably are the victims of a lot of this demeaning behavior, how do you square that circle?
I mean, there is a lot of righteous anger around income inequality. And that's not the fault of technology per se. It's the fault of a system that is allowing this amazing wealth divide. And it feels like it's kind of compromising our entire democratic system. I really believe it is not American of us to put up with this. Tech just seems to be the poster child for it, in part for some of its cultural bad behavior, and in part for some of the amazing salaries that are getting paid, as well as the rapid wealth accumulation, at least on paper, that we are seeing. But that anger is real, and we all need to pay attention to it. And in the Bay Area, you know, Silicon Valley, and this is what's so interesting about being in Oakland, and if I can just bring Ed Lee back into the conversation again. Ed Lee truly was a regionalist. He truly reached out to the other cities in the Bay Area and talked about how interconnected we were and how we really needed to view our challenges on a regional basis. And so when my Oakland residents are so angry at me about the displacement that is going on in our city, it is so frustrating that I have to say, well, it's because Silicon Valley has added 8 jobs for every 1 new unit of housing that we've built in the Bay Area. And I can tell you, and this is probably true of most cities, 2/3 of my residents work in a different city. 2/3 of the workers who work in Oakland live in another city. They're literally passing each other on the freeway every morning. And so we can't view these issues in the bubble of our little municipal boundaries, because all those jobs that got added to Cupertino, some of those workers pushed out my longtime runners in Oakland.
Do you think these firms are derelict in their responsibility in helping to solve this problem?
I think they're blissfully ignorant, and I think they're starting to wake up. They're waking up. I wish I could say it's because it's the right thing to do, and for some people it probably is, but it is hurting everybody's bottom line now. We know that the strength of the Bay Area economy is our talent. And now we're finding that talent cannot afford to live here or stay here. And so it is starting to impact every single institution, because people are finding out. This happened to my kid. I had this great teacher. My son in 4th grade had this phenomenal teacher. And 2 years later, I said, I want my daughter to have her. She was amazing. Well, she left the Bay Area because she couldn't afford to stay here. So it's a million stories like that of amazing people that are just not able to survive.
I want to be sure to go to the audience next and have you ask some questions here. But if you were to project ahead, when are you up for election next time?
Just about a year from now, November 2018.
So a year from now. So let's say 12 months. Everything happens fast here. So in 12 months, as you look at the Libby Schaaf story of what you have done, who's the villain in your story? Who's the hero in your story? Who helped you achieve what you needed? Who got in the way?
Let me talk about the heroes. You know, my whole mantra about being the mayor of Oakland is that everything I do has to be in the long-term interest of the city. And I think too often politicians are tempted to try and get the quick win, the thing that looks good right now, as opposed to really doing the hard work, one, to make sustainable changes that will last long after you're gone, but also are going to take a while before that seed actually flowers and bears fruit. And I have been amazed at the level of support and partnership that I have gotten for something called the Oakland Promise. And the Oakland Promise intends to triple the number of Oakland public school students who graduate not just from high school, but from college. Right
you tell
now,
the rate was 10%, right?
yeah, my 9th grade class, only 10% of them will have a college degree 6 years after graduation. That is ridiculous. I can tell you that I have the most brilliant, amazing, talented young people in the universe. And we, as a public system, are not unlocking that potential or giving them the skills and the support that they need to realize their full potential. And they are right here in this region that has more opportunities than just about anywhere else in the world. My kids deserve those opportunities. And that, if I do one thing as the mayor of Oakland, it is going to be damn sure that my kids are in line for those opportunities.
That's great. Who or what do you throw darts at?
Whew. I throw darts at maybe this is unfair, but like whatever. I've had a long week, and it's only Tuesday.
It may be me. It may be me. All right, let's take some questions.
No, you said
Uh-huh.
the regional government 30 years ago.
Regional government 30 years ago.
We've got to see ourselves as a region. When Burlingame comes and says, well, we don't want housing in Burlingame, I'm like, you are not in a bubble. You've got to see yourself
There's a tweetable moment.
as part of, sorry, Burlingame.
Yeah.
You've
Sorry,
got to see
Burlingame,
yourself
hashtag.
as part of an
I'm gonna start things
interconnected
here.
region.
How many of you live in Burlingame? Watch out. There you go. There we come. Okay, yes, right here. Hi, first row.
This is just a question. There'll be some quick points.
Yeah.
My name is Paula Egan, and I'm with Campbell Adult Education down the peninsula.
Hi.
How can these problems be solved? That's my question. Question is that high-tech companies typically have never been flexible, so women often enough lose the opportunity. So if a woman takes time off for her child, especially in the tech field, they're seen as dead as dodos, okay? Take 3 years off, they're dead. That's one point. Secondly, it goes back
I'm going to ask you to make it a question.
Okay,
No,
so
that's
how
a
can
question. How are we going to solve that problem?
Yeah, my first question, I mean,
Right.
basically, how are we going to solve the problem? Next point was what you had mentioned about Sheryl Sandberg's book and how it related more to white women. Well, I think one of the things also people should be aware of is that many of the caregivers of children are women who are lower income women of color. And finally, it goes back to the housing issue that all up and down, not just in Oakland, all the way down to San Jose, Silicon Valley, people in the service sector, be it restaurant workers, anything, or childcare workers, they are all being displaced.
Right.
So you have, in a sense, going back to, women of color, two-tier model.
Thank you for that. So the question is how do we fix it, but how do we fix the ecosystem? Because what I liked about how you framed that is that they're component pieces that if you pick one, you just get a reaction back from the others. So I think it's a profoundly difficult situation, but I do think that there's an ecosystem challenge here and wonder, how does someone like you approach that?
So two very specific things in Oakland that are examples of, I think, I'm not saying it's going to solve the problem, but it's addressing this problem. One, we've created something called the Startup Network, and that's in partnership with the KPOR Center and Dev Labs. I love the KPORs. Let me just put that right out there. Fierce. Yeah. Another thing, and this again, is KPOR initiated, is the Tech Equity Collaborative. And it's really being intentional to say, if you've got, I've had 2 babies. I breastfed them. Has anyone else had to skip the cocktail party because you had to go upstairs and pump your milk? Yeah, unless you've experienced that, you just don't know what that's like. So to have more diverse people with diverse life experiences, non-dominant identity, actually leading companies creates a different work culture, and it creates different policies. I will never forget my original communications director, literally had tears in her eyes when she said, because I have a pretty heavy female staff. I hired the most competent people. It was not intentional. It just turned out that way. But she said, I don't know if I've ever had a job where I felt like I could bring my full self to work. That's, That's deep. So we need it makes a difference who is in power. So to recognize what are the things that are keeping non-traditional people out of those positions. Well, one is access to capital, both financial and social. And so both of these initiatives that I'm talking about exist to very intentionally bring social and financial capital to diverse founders and people who are starting up. The last thing I'm going to say is sometimes we have policies in place that on their face don't look discriminatory, but when you start looking at the impact, you recognize that they are. So for example, to borrow money, you need to have a credit score, you need to have collateral. Who does that leave out? Basically, if you don't have money, you can't borrow money. If you have money, then you can borrow money. That makes no sense, does it? So, you know, I'm a huge fan of Kiva. Anybody do lending on Kiva? Sure. Love those people. Right. Oakland is their strongest city in America. We have closed more than 470 zero-interest loans for very small, very diverse, more than 80% entrepreneurs of color in Oakland. Wow. That's breaking down those barriers. That's what we need to look
final
at.
question, Mayor. Have you finished your life goals, or are you interested in being governor, senator, president? Anything like that cross your mind?
If you saw my behavior in the last week, you can tell that that everything I do is in the long-term interest of Oakland. You cannot be a mayor and not make decisions like it is the last job you will ever have for the rest of your life. That's the only way to do it ethically. That's the only way to do it with integrity. So that's as far as I'm thinking. I'm up for re-election next year. I am up for another 4 years of this crazy job. That I am.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Libby Schaaf. Thank you very, very much.